And then finally, this is myself and a former student, we did a study last year that I think is interesting and maybe even important, where we showed, remember what did they call it, the Depression of 2007? I mean the recession, I mean the mild economic setback that debilitated a third of our country, has been attributed, some say, to risky financial decisions. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with a thing called the Iowa gambling task. It was developed by the brain surgeon Damasio. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? All right, forget about that. All right, so it turns out there's a little paradigm. It's called the Iowa gambling task, and it's been used widely in cognitive neuroscience because who's heard about brain damaged people make bad decisions because they don't have the inhibitory capacities in their forebrain? And they, on this Iowa gambling task, people with certain forebrain lesions, they make risky decisions in an effort. It's like a card game, basically, and you have to decide if you want to risk a lot in order to make a lot, or risk a little where you're going to make a little. Anyway, to make a short story long, it turns out that when you risk a lot in this little game, you inevitably lose. And when you just risk a little, you inevitably gain. And non-brain damaged people catch on very quickly, and they go for the smaller but guaranteed outcome. Brain damaged people, they go for the riskier decisions all the time. So do people that are reminded of their mortality. So sociopaths, brain damaged people, and people reminded of their mortality engage in riskier fiscal decisions. And I would argue that that has something to do with our current malaise. Can I have 4 more minutes? 4 more minutes, is that okay? Okay, so what? All right, so what do we do about all these things? Of course, I don't know. If I did, I'd not be here. I'd be chugging rum out of my proverbial coconut on the beach with my Nobel Prize. That's why we're here today. But a few things. I know Merlin last evening talked about constructive illusions, that if human beings are fundamentally meaning-making, storytelling creatures, then let's get a better story. We can do better and come up with non-destructive forms of heroism. Why not? I don't think any one approach is going to suffice here, and so I see no reason why, in the spirit of becoming better illusion makers. Yeah, let's give that a go. Yesterday, I was in San Diego, which is why I couldn't be here with you all last night, and I was asked to talk about Janice's paper on a panel at an interdisciplinary conference about environmental sustainability. And I thought the most interesting paper was not mine. I didn't listen to myself. I was thinking about what was going to be for lunch. But these other people, Tim Huxley, Virginia Commonwealth, Peter Hampson, University of the West of England, they delivered a paper called Virtuous Habits, Moral Psychology, and Environmental Sustainability. And I'm going to get copies and circulate this through our group. And I thought this was lovely. These were very, very thoughtful people. And they based their ideas both on contemporary cognitive psychology and St. Thomas Aquinas. It was just awesome because they were like, look, what changing worldviews, sure, let's do that, but you know, everyone wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves, said that crazy Indian dude, Krishnamurti. And what these folks said in the spirit of Aquinas is we as individuals have a lot of work to do ourselves. And I wish I could do justice, because the guy spoke British. You know how you sound smarter? Just when you talk Bronx, let's face it, you're off to a bad start to begin with. You just sound stupid. But they didn't. But anyway, they were talking about Aquinas. And they talked about the development of prudent habits. And as silly as it sounds, just that it's incumbent upon each of us to, through conscious concern, through practice, to cultivate habits, not mindless automatic behavior, but rather making conscious decisions about often difficult behavioral choices and then rendering them habitual by sheer moral force. And I don't want to hold myself up as the paragon of virtue, but through sheer force in the last 2 years, it's not a big deal because I live 3 or 4 miles from where I work. But I've only driven to where I work, I think, 3 or 4 times in the last 3 years. And okay, fine, that's not going to reduce the gaping hole in the ozone layer. But if enough of us did little things, I think the sum total of little acts on the part of individuals, I don't think that could hurt either. So, all right, so that's another thing. Third thing is I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of getting out there in the trenches, in terms of pushing some of these ideas into the sphere of so-called public intellectual discourse. I've been at some conferences lately with political philosophers, and I've been going at it with some of the John Locke people, who's like a darling of neoconservatives. Because Locke, I don't know how many of you know his work, but in the second treatise on government, Locke declares nature to be waste. He has contempt for nature. He just says, oh, that's just waste. And I think a lot of American contempt for raw nature comes from Locke. But there's surprises in Locke, because at one of these conferences, just this ardent Locke fan said, yeah, okay, maybe Locke has some work to do with his contempt for nature. But she pointed out that Locke, if he were here today, might surprise and be quite the environmentalist in his own way, because Locke was very clear that individuals should be free to pursue their own self-interest, but never when it restrains somebody else's interests. And Locke was virulently opposed to waste. He just said, you are only entitled to use that, or to have rather, that which you can consume, and anything beyond that is wasteful and gluttonous. And so even here, I think we have points of connection between, I'm going to put us all in a lump, Birkenstock-clad, granola-chomping, naively optimistic, right-minded hippie throwbacks. I think we have points of connection between other discourses that I think might be a good way to start. We're certainly not going to get anywhere if we confine our conversations to people who already agree with us. And then finally, for what it's worth, I think that we also, and Kirby reminded me of this, and I think this is an important point, and that's that we can't lose track of both physical reality and the vagaries of human nature, as Becker was quick to remind us. On the physical reality end of things, there are too many people pissing in the proverbial pool. And these are very real problems. There's not enough water. There's not enough air. There's not enough land. There's too many people, and those problems are probably not going to go away on their own. Who knows the Garrett Hardin dude, Tragedy of the Commons? Right, quite the Nazi, but Nazis are people too, and he had some important ideas that I think it would behoove us to attend to, the foremost of which is that if we expect people to change because it's the right thing to do, then we're in trouble. And he just points out that if you say, for example, oh yeah, people, there's too many people, would you please keep your pickle in your pocket and not have that many kids, because everyone would be a lot better off? Well, some people will do that, but not everybody. And the result of that is the decent altruistic people will breed themselves out of existence, and the gene pool will now be inhabited by what in evolutionary parlance are called cheaters. And Hardin's point is that, like it or not, the only way good stuff will happen, he called it mutually agreed upon coercion. I call it fascist humanism, which is my new political party. And that is that some things will have to be done legislatively and by force, but that's not necessarily contrary to the democratic ideal of participatory democracy. I'll say one more thing, but I don't want to overstay my welcome, and that is that I think one of the most exciting, albeit I think for me personally, discombobulating notions that's coming out of the study of reciprocal altruism in evolutionary psychology these days is that the two worst states of affairs in any population are where everyone is selfish, duh, of course, that's no good, or when everyone is indiscriminately altruistic. And that's the surprise, that a society of Mother Teresa's is actually terribly unstable. And in theory and in practice, therefore, the best way to cultivate and maintain the kinds of social orders that I think each of us would like to see, whether we like it or not, require sticks as well as carrots, ways of identifying and discouraging people from parasitizing the system. And that's a hard one for some of us to think about in terms of wanting to be more cheerfully optimistic that we could affect wholesale changes in the absence of, however you want to call it, coercion of some sort. All right, that's a somber note to end on, but that's fine. I'll stop and hope that this was a good way for us to begin. And thanks, this was fun. Thank you.